As part of the big, beautiful bill adopted by Republicans in Washington, D.C. last summer, supporters of private schools have an opportunity to donate up to $1,700 to approved scholarship granting organizations to get a one-to-one discount on their federal taxes. But participation is contingent on states opting into the program, and there has been no action to date here in New York, where Democratic policymakers are loath to do anything that could be perceived as supporting private schools at the expense of public schools. In the state's defense, though, they have until the end of 2026 to sign up. To make the case for the initiative, we're joined in the Capitol Press Room by Dennis Poust, Executive Director of the New York State Catholic Conference. Thanks for joining us in the studio, Dennis.
Hey, David. It's good to be with you again.
So it's my understanding is that this is a new federal tax credit up to $1,700 for contributions made to a scholarship granting organization. What could that potentially mean?
Well, it could mean a lot, and not just for private schools. It also could apply to public schools, because public school supporters could set up organizations, because according to the legislation, the funds could be used for things like tutoring, technology, all sorts of special needs, anything that really that would benefit public schools as well. For our schools, for Catholic schools, Jewish schools, other non-public schools, it could be a real game changer for our families, because, as you know, they pay school taxes to their school district, but they also pay the increasing cost of tuition, and this would help them to afford education.
Well, what does the landscape look like right now for, say, a scholarship to private schools? Are these an important part of the calculation for families and their kids? Or for the most part here in New York, are there not really that many scholarships available?
No, there are. And our schools do a great job of raising funds. And, especially downstate, we have several funds that are already set up that are already scholarship granting organizations. The Intercity Scholarship Fund in the Archdiocese of New York, Tomorrow's Hope in the Diocese of Rockville Center, Futures in Education in Brooklyn. They give out millions of dollars in scholarships to kids, and 91% of them are members of minority groups. Like 80% of them are below the poverty level. So these are kids in need. We don't educate the wealthy. We educate blue-collar working families and poor kids.
And how much of a game changer would this be in terms of an incentive for people to donate to a scholarship granting organization? Are there already tax incentives to do something like this, or is this a real sort of first of its kind?
Well, a lot of states already have programs like this. And
for state taxes?
For state taxes.
Okay.
And you can't double dip according to the legislation. Whatever you take as a state tax credit comes off of what you're allowed to take for the federal tax credit.
Okay.
So if you're in a state that has it. But for anybody else, like in New York, there is a tax deduction for giving to these organizations. They're 501c3 charities, so like any charity, you could take that deduction. But that requires you to itemize, and it also is a lot less generous than a tax credit. So a tax credit actually comes off your tax bill. So if you say, let's say you have a $10,000 tax bill, you could choose to basically redirect 1,700 of that to keep it away from the federal government and to send it to kids who need help with their education. That, I think, is a really great deal and a no-brainer for the governor.
Yeah, the idea of a no-brainer here. Is there any potential loss in federal revenue that the state might be counting on as a result of something like this? Or based on your accounting, does this not have any downside to the state's coffers?
There's no downside to the state coffers. It doesn't take a dollar away from public education. And, if I was making an elevator pitch to Governor Hochul, I'd say, well, people are going to part with their money anyway, right? So they're either going to send it to the IRS, or if she doesn't opt in, they could choose to send it to a scholarship granting organization out of state to benefit kids out of state. Or she can keep the money here. And wouldn't she rather do that than maybe send it to the IRS for President Trump and Mike Johnson to do what they want to do with it, right? So this is a way for her to keep it in New York and help her constituents instead of letting Washington decide what to do with that money.
It's my understanding that the state has until the end of the year to opt in. From your perspective, though, is there any reason why they should act sooner than later?
Well, yeah, because we hear from our scholarship granting organizations that this would really help them to start being able to promote it and to take in a lot of donations from people. So the sooner that she does it, I understand where she's coming from. She says she's waiting for the federal regs to come out, which we hope that at least that the public comment period should come hopefully in the next month or so, and then the regs should be finalized in the summer. But But we would like her to opt in immediately. 28 governors already have done that. And we think it's such, again, to use the term no-brainer, that we don't know why she would wait. If she wants to wait for the regs, great, but we do hope she's favorably inclined to opt in, and I think she will.
Well, you alluded to the fact that right now we have sort of the broad authorizing language from the law itself, but where the rubber meets the road, the details have not been promulgated.
Right.
So why isn't that a good reason to wait and see before actually opting in? Because the devil is always in the details when it comes to government and money, I imagine.
Yeah, and it's a fair point. And the governor has indicated she's not going to opt in before she sees the regs, and we accept that. Of course, we'd love her to opt in, right? We'd love her to opt in before other voices start chirping and say, "Don't do this." Although, honestly, even if we know that the primary opponents are probably going to be the teachers' unions because they don't like anything that involves school choice, right? So, or anything that could even hint at school choice. But I would say, NYSA could set up an SGO of their own that the governor could approve. They have 600,000 members. Their members could take their $1,700 credit, and that's $1 billion for public school kids, if just from NYSA members. So I really think that at the end of the day, she's going to opt in. If she wants to wait for the regs, it's a reasonable thing, and I'm not going to criticize that. But we would like her to opt in just as soon as possible, so these SGOs can get up and running and sort of start promoting this as a real benefit and take in more money for when 2027 rolls around.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with Dennis Poust, the Executive Director of the New York State Catholic Conference. So as you pointed out, there's really no downside to a person who wants to give to a scholarship granting organization as it pertains to their tax bill. And if we do see a dramatic increase in giving to scholarship granting organizations, do you think we have enough checks and balances on those organizations to ensure that this doesn't become, say, a slush fund for nefarious actors who maybe aren't necessarily funneling all that money to kids or tutoring programs? Or maybe you even see charter schools or private schools who then say, well, we've got this subsidy coming in, maybe we can afford to charge a little bit more.
Right. Well, we already have long-standing SGOs, as I mentioned earlier, that have a great track record, and with boards with very prominent individuals. These are not fly-by-night organizations, but the state would have an interest in making sure that the governor. It's going to be up to the governor to certify every SGO. Okay. So when the governor opts in, which she would do, would be say, I'm going to participate, and here is my list of eligible SGOs. So the governor, at the end of the day, has the final say over what groups. And the legislation also puts some restrictions on. Like, for instance, it can't be scholarships can only go to families at under 300% of the poverty threshold, for example. Or you can't have an SGO set up for one school where you're directing all the money to one school. So like St. Francis of Assisi Church school can't just set up their own SGO and basically just collect money from their own families to pay their own kids scholarships. It can't work that way.
Well, given the governor's outsized role in identifying who can participate, do you have any concerns that a version of this will only go towards, say, tutoring at public schools and will exclude private schools or certain charter schools or organizations led by people who might be antagonists of the governor?
Well, that is a very good question, and I don't think it's going to be an issue here in New York because New York has such a long history. New York State has a long history of partnering with religious and independent schools. And we have a good relationship with the state. There may be other states where they try, where Democratic governors try and limit it, to certain ways to keep it from religious schools. But I think the Supreme Court already has been, in case law in the Supreme Court has been pretty clear. You can't extend a benefit that, an equal benefit to only secular institutions. If it's an equal benefit, you can't exclude a religious organization, for example.
So you're not worried potentially of David Lombardo launching the scholarship granting organization for tutoring about the greatness of Governor Kathy Hochul and then all of the money going to that institution?
No, I don't think that that's going to be possible.
Well, finally, while I've got you here in the last couple of minutes, Anything else that you're interested in or focusing on as part of the ongoing budget process, maybe as it pertains to private schools, or anything else in the Catholic Conference scope?
Yeah, well, we are actively advocating for full funding for mandated services aid for our schools, and
Okay.
there is a bit of a backlog. The governor has increased it somewhat, but there is still a backlog of money that we're owed that we're hoping to get. But also, we're looking for full funding for which we put at about $12 million for our compliance with the state's immunization reporting mandates. Historically, and it's kind of a convoluted thing, but historically only New York City, Rochester, and Buffalo have gotten funding for that because I think historically other school districts always provided nursing services from public school districts, and they sort of took care of that. But that's less and less. There are many fewer public school nurses in our schools anymore. So it's a cost to our schools. And so that's something we're seeking. We're looking very closely at the immigration, the funding for immigration legal services and those things. The governor has put more money into that. And so we're hopeful that the legislature, and we expect the legislature will maintain or even increase that funding to help with legal services for undocumented immigrants and so on. So those are some of the things we're looking at.
For the vaccine requirements, is that, I assume, more than just, say, for record keeping, if we're talking $12 million? Is that for personnel to actually help administer the vaccines for young people?
Yeah, in many cases, yeah. Well, but also, yeah, there's the manpower hours to do it. It does add up. We have a lot of schools, and not just our schools, but but that $12 million isn't just for Catholic schools. It's for the entire religious and independent school community. So, we're talking about over 400,000 kids. So, it does add up quickly.
Well, maybe there can be a scholarship for it in the future. Well, we've been speaking with Dennis Poust. He is the executive director of the New York State Catholic Conference. Dennis, thanks so much for joining us in the studio. I really appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure, David. Thank you for having me.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.